Anarchists, anti-authoritarians, and radicals of all stripes spend a disproportionate amount of time and energy confronting the so-called big-picture challenges of the world. In this all-consuming competition to change society, too often we overlook the personal struggles that many of us face, including some of the most basic questions of how we relate to ourselves, each other, and the world around us. For some, the mundane tasks of day-to-day living can feel so meaningless or so hyper-important that even the simplest decisions become impossible to manage. For others, ongoing or past experiences of physical danger, trauma, and instability can severely compound the difficulties that we already face surviving in a white supremacist, hetero-patriarchal, and capitalist society. Yet despite the large number of us who face these struggles daily, within our movements, mental health is often tokenized or treated as an afterthought, and mental illness is often invisibilized. Mainstream society polarizes crazy people. On the one hand, it lifts a few of us up to celebrate our creative brilliance in the fields of art, film, books, and music.
When you hear about slavery for 400 years, that sounds like a choice.
On the other, it stigmatizes and fears us, controlling and locking us up. Far from being a fast track to creative stardom, mental illness leaves millions of people to fall through the cracks of our neurotypical society. Most insanity does not get celebrated. For many, it means losing your job or home because you can't get out of bed, not being able to socialize or organize due to anxiety, paranoia, or the inability to maintain relationships, using risky coping mechanisms to try and manage your own symptoms, or relying on the toxic mental health system for your very survival. To the extent that they can be separated, the psychiatric and pharmaceutical industries both extract incredible profits in their supposed pursuit of our mental wellness. Yet, for those who would seek to break free from the state and capital system of pathological diagnoses and lucrative prescriptions, what exactly does that leave us with? Over the next 30 minutes, we will speak with a range of individuals as they share their insights on the causes and potential solutions to mental illness, and share their experiences of fighting stigma, dealing with trauma, and getting into the proper headspace to make a whole lot of trouble.
Mental health means our own interior kind of wellness, our own personal equilibrium of how we respond to the ails of the world.
Mental health is your own way of feeling balanced and feeling that you're well. And we need to take it in a very broad sense. In different cultures around the world, well-being in itself is so different. So I would see mental health as a very open way of are you feeling balanced and able to face life in the complexity that it is.
As Indigenous people, we've lived through an enormous amount of trauma, and trying to find that balance, living in the environment that you do, is challenging.
Mental health is the term that I used to talk about sort of being unable to cope with reality in different forms of things that my brain does and ways that I change the way that I perceive the world that are usually pretty harmful to my life.
In the society that we live in, oftentimes mental health ends up actually eclipsing the larger context. That language that we use to talk about mental health is the language of the biomedical model. But meanwhile, it leaves out the social context, and we're not talking at all about the living situation that you're in, or the color of your skin, or the kind of access you had to housing, or the access you had to education, and what you have to deal with on a daily basis.
So if you live on reserve, you have all kinds of challenges there. You live off reserve, you have a whole new set of challenges, and you work through them all. How do you make it better for the next generation?
Since mental health is primarily influenced by social factors, there's no real way to solve it without changing the social condition that we're in. What we see it as is being able to use your psychological abilities to help fight against the repression that comes towards you. We need to figure out ways to increase our ability to fight against the forces that are helping make us mentally ill, as it were.
So I see mental health not just as something that belongs to a person or lives in a person, but rather sort of a response to the condition that is around us that causes us to hurt in this world.
Mental unwellness in broader society is an epidemic.
Whether it's just plain old capitalism that's like really selling the idea of anything solvable through some exchange of money.
The terms of success, of a successful life that have been passed down by the state, by mass media, they're really unattainable for almost everyone. And then even when people do achieve material success in these terms, they struggle with finding meaning.
The conditions around us have other psychologically damaging effects. The way that we relate to each other socially and the tendency towards seeking of social capital than seeking actual close relationships with people.
When I think about mental health in my quote immediate community, I see a community that is making space for particular people who are living with mental health issues. What I'm reminded of is the ability for a Black man in my building to live mad while Black and walk around in this building in that way would probably not happen. Because what I know is happening not just in this city, but in this province and in this country is police responses to Black people living with mental health issues or mad identified, often, but not always, result in fatal shootings.
I would say generally in my community, a lot of people have struggles, a lot of people see therapists, some people have diagnoses, some people are medicated. So I would say in the anarchist community, a lot of people are struggling, but there's a lot more conversations about that, a lot more informal peer support than in other communities that friends and family who are not anarchists are a part of.
What I see happening in the mental health system is that there are an incredible number of people who struggle with issues of trauma. And what happens is when they come into the system and end up getting diagnosed with a mental illness, what's happened to them in the past gets eclipsed by this culture, which is very wrapped up in this whole model where there's a drug for everything that you could possibly need. A huge piece of what we can do is think outside the medical box and use more transformative ways of thinking.
Human beings are social creatures, meaning that we simultaneously engage with and are shaped by our surroundings. This fact is often overlooked by those who see madness as nothing more than a neurochemical imbalance. In reality, social factors such as how broke you are, the color of your skin, your gender and sexual orientation, and how well you pass as a productive member of capitalist society all play huge roles in determining how you are treated, what healthcare and social supports you have access to, and therefore greatly shape your emotional and mental well-being. The hyper-individualization promoted by our current social media paradigm swaps human contact for superficial interactions based on curated personas of likes and follows.
Did you lose your subscribers?
The realm of spirituality has been so co-opted and tainted by religious institutions that many of us have no access to rituals and traditions that could help us feel a meaningful connection to the world around us. Profiting off this mess is the pharmaceutical industry, comprised of some of the world's biggest corporate powerhouses who spend billions each year lobbying doctors to push their newest and most lucrative designer drugs, all with the goal of getting as many people medicated as they can.
When 1 in 4 people suffer from mental illness, I have to sort of question what that means. Whatever the status of mental health is, it's rapidly declining, and I think that's happening in an intentional manner. It just seems to me that anything and everything is being described as a mental health problem in such a way that it creates this false idea that there is a mental health solution for that, possibly in the name of a pill, but often in the name of some other additional kind of control.
A lot of the factors that lead to what we tend to call mental illness are entirely out of control of the people who are experiencing them and aren't really from a biological or chemical root. They're from social condition that the people are in.
How can we live in a world that we're in and be, quote, well?
We need to recognize that the society that we live in is actually very unhealthy. If we're starting from this place that what we're trying to do is get people to be healthy so that they can fit into society,
that to me is really scary because I'm often sad and I'm often hurt and I'm often anxious and paranoid. And those are for very real reasons. My spirit can't be stable if the material world around me is absolutely scary.
The real, visceral, and true fear of deportation, bankruptcy, homelessness, incarceration. These are things that contribute to someone's individual experience of despair. And rather than offering a solution, it's always just some pill or injection or just removal.
I work with refugee claimants. The very first weeks they arrive here in Canada, they live a whole different range of challenges. A lot comes from what they carry, what they lived in their countries. War, rape, being jailed, being tortured, but also a lot of things they live trying to get to Canada. So some of them might have traveled a whole year, crossing 10 different countries without documents, without papers, before they arrive here. So it's a very heavy weight they carry with them. And also a lot of challenges they face is actually arriving here with nothing and having to face what it is to be refugee claimant in Canada. One of the hardest things is being in a state where you don't know what's going to happen to you, right? So you might wait a year, 2 years to know if you're going to be able to stay here. So this period of just not knowing what you can build for yourself and your kid as a life is very hard, very stressful.
I think it's really important, if we're going to talk about mental health and mental wellness, that we think about ourselves related to a larger social context. I think one of the things that really impacts our mental health is that we live in such an individualistic society where we think the things that are happening to us are happening because of our brain chemistry, or they're happening to us because of some fault of ours, because we're not strong enough to survive, when really there are these larger social issues that are impacting everyone.
On a personal level, I get into trouble when I get disconnected from things that are meaningful to me in the world. One of the things that I want to do with my life is engage with all of the imbalances of power with communities that are trying to counter those imbalances.
A lot of the factors are just the standard foundation of society, which is anti-blackness, racism, and capitalism. And until those are destroyed, there's no actual solution.
When I think about the conditions that contribute to unwellness for Black people, the number one is generally the experience of the transatlantic slave trade, first and foremost, the experience of colonialism, the ongoing experiences of colonialism, the ongoing occupations of Black spaces. I see the hyper-surveillance of those communities as particular kinds of occupations. I'm using that word, sort of in soft quotes, while keeping in mind the context of what the word occupation means here.
500 years of colonialism has really taken its toll on Indigenous people, and has taken it in so many different ways. There's been a lot of hurt. There's been a lot of pain. There's been a lot of trauma that's been passed on from generation to generation. It's a real struggle to get better when you're left to fend for yourself. But it seems like in a lot of the communities, they purposely take everything away and then it feels like they're just waiting to see everybody die. I think that with the high rates of suicide in every single community, I know the Inuit community is probably the highest, but even in my community, the suicide rate is pretty high. I think that when you're always surrounded by death because people give up, that having these ceremonies to turn to where you can honor their memory and be surrounded by healers is a good way. And because the Indian Act forced us to give up all those ceremonies, now is the time where we have to relearn them.
Of all the modern sciences aimed at reproducing subservience and reinforcing state power, psychiatry is particularly nasty. Its history is fraught with the warehousing and torture of countless individuals in sanitariums and asylums. In their eternal quest to understand and destroy that which is different, states have performed every conceivable type of experiment on human test subjects, from mass sterilizations and LSD-induced comas to decades of routine lobotomies. Psychiatrists' enthusiastic embrace of eugenics during the early 20th century was a major inspiration for Nazi scientists, providing them a convenient pseudoscientific justification for the Holocaust. And while the term became taboo after World War II, the inherent link between psychiatry and eugenics continued long after, and, some would argue, still exists today. Although psychiatry poses amidst the hard science-based branches of medicine, nowhere else is the creation of medical conditions and disorders so socially manufactured as in psychiatry's Bible, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or DSM. While the process of deciding how to categorize the mentally unwell can involve aspects of the scientific method, it is oftentimes no more than a room full of old white men promoting their collective social biases and individual agendas.
Ralph was sick, a sickness that was not visible like smallpox, but no less dangerous and contagious, a sickness of the mind. You see, Ralph was a homosexual.
Within the sacred pages of the DSM, homosexuality was considered a mental disorder until 1987, and to this day, many transgender people need to be diagnosed with a mental illness in order to receive the treatments they need. Women who may have once been labeled as nymphomaniacs or hysterics are today branded instead with BPD, or borderline personality disorder, a catch-all diagnosis primarily inscribed on women whose histories of trauma are not seen as real or legitimate. Although there have been attempts to distance psychiatry from this legacy, its ongoing history is one of padded cells, forced injections, electroshock, and indefinite institutionalization. If you find yourself on the wrong side of the modern mental health care system, you can easily fall into a vicious feedback loop of mental health crises, often caused by trauma, leading to further violence and re-traumatization. This may take the form of forced hospitalization, incarceration, hurting yourself or people that you love, or ultimately being murdered by the police.
The state engages with mental unwellness by being the identifier of those of us that are well and those of us that are unwell.
So the state and psychiatry define being well in terms of how well you conform to a normal. And in this society, that normal encompasses all of the problematic natures of mainstream society. If you went back and asked your guidance counselor what their version of success would be for you moving forward, well, it's like how well you conform.
They started the residential schools to assimilate the children. It was the law that if you didn't give up your children, you were sent to jail. They call the foster care system like the next residential school. The kids that are in care aren't brought up in a good way and they fall through the cracks.
The state usually criminalizes mental unwellness. Generally, if you look at the way that psych wards operate, it's not significantly different than prison. And if you look at the way that prisons operate, they're usually used as psych wards. There's no real distinction between the carcerality of American society in general and the way that we treat the mentally ill, including the way that police shoot mentally ill people.
A police officer shoots and kills a teenager with schizophrenia.
A mentally ill man being shot 4 times by a police officer despite the fact that the victim showed no threat of force.
A mentally ill man shot dead by 2 Dallas officers.
I've spent 4.5 months in state jails, about a month and a half in psych wards. And there are some like really noticeable similarities. There's coercive violence, isolation, but the difference is that like when I'm in jail, I'm well and I'm myself. I'm in a battle against the state and they're my enemy and they've locked me in a cage. And when I'm in a psych ward, it's like a whole different world. I don't understand what's going on. I have no connection to myself. If I refuse medication, I'll be tackled to the ground and have it injected into me. The trauma that I feel in my life from having been in jail is so much less profound than the trauma that comes from a psych ward.
Generally, mental illness is treated as something to push under the rug and hide and either like fix with, dumbing you down enough that you can actually deal with whatever bullshit society is giving you, or with putting you away if you're unable to actually get back into the capitalist flow of things.
Generally, the state engage with unwellness on a complete individual basis. The problem is individualized and the solution is also individualized.
Self-care is usually a stand-in for a lot of neoliberal approaches to dealing with mental health problems.
I worry that sometimes this expectation that people practice self-care kind of misses the target in many ways.
Generally, it focuses on a very individualized approach of like taking care of your personal needs as far as like attention or how people interact with you or things like that.
My wellness is maintained by taking pharmaceutical drugs that are made by some of the worst corporations in the world. People that are capitalizing off of hypermedication, they're advertising to doctors to try and get, as big of a quarterly fucking profit as they can.
You have to simultaneously be able to hold the understanding that the pharmaceutical industry, like really what they're interested in is profit, and they're going to try and get as many people as they possibly can addicted to their drugs, with the reality that like there's actually a lot of people for whom the drugs are really helpful. Not nearly as many people as who are on them, but I think it's really important to be able to like have that analysis where you don't just get shut down and think in a black and white framework.
And I think that just because a system exists doesn't mean that we can't critique it while understanding that there are some people that might benefit from that. And that there's no shame in being able to be a person that decides what your care might look like. That doesn't make you less critical. It doesn't make you less of a mental health advocate.
As a psychiatrist, basically have to work with a lot of people who have, at least historically, if not currently, find psych drugs and hospitalizations helpful, at least to some extent. And I think that's fine. What I do like to focus on with people is maybe a return to like true informed consent. I like to focus, when possible, on supporting people who maybe can't find somebody who is able and willing to help them taper or withdraw from the medications that they've been taking, or live in a less coercive environment during a crisis.
You have to walk in the white man's world to get the accreditation that they find believable in order for you to help your own people. For instance, I can get a psychologist from Health Canada, they'll pay for that. But I can't get funding from Health Canada to pay for my spiritual elder because he doesn't have a degree in spirituality.
Rather than unquestioningly accepting the state's authority on the causes and nature of mental unwellness and official dictates on what our interventions can and should look like, today many crazy people are asserting our power to choose the right mix of institutional and informal supports for the problems we face. This growing movement seeks to counter stigmatizing conceptions of mental illness that paint it as an isolated and individualized phenomenon, positing instead the need for dynamic, peer-based solutions rooted in interconnectedness and community support. Social media, with all its flaws, can play an important role in building peer-to-peer networks by offering us the ability to connect with others who have faced similar experiences. This can be particularly helpful for individuals that face geographic or emotional barriers to community and mental health support. Because at the end of the day, the best person to take care of someone in mental health crisis is often someone who's already been through it themselves.
try to support or be allied with people that face this type of mental health issue or trauma, we should be in a way curious, not be afraid to ask questions, to learn and to try to connect with those people we try to help, and really try to understand on a human and deeper level what these people faced in the past and what are they feeling right now.
The government did everything that they could to destroy us, and yet we're still here. We all carry a different kind of trauma, and sometimes those traumas eat away at us until there's nothing left. And sometimes those traumas, we're able to work through them and they become our almost energy source to keep moving forward so that we can help the next generation. I have hope that, this generation is addressing these issues in a good way so that we don't continue the trauma and try to reverse it if possible.
Situations and humans are so complex, and we need to really be open to that complexity. Never try to simplify or put labels on people. This person is traumatized, or this person is going to be okay, she's strong, she's resilient, right? We simplify situations that are very complex.
People tend to have a lot of personal and community ways of dealing with mental health problems, but societally we tend to fail entirely. Generally, what I've noticed in communities is a desire to help and a lack of ability to. The actual social conditions that cause these kinds of problems are more what needs to be addressed, and no one really seems to do that very well.
The best community support that I'm a part of is very informal. It's just talking with friends about how we're doing, what we're thinking about.
A lot of it is about building those relationships beforehand, because whatever you do when a crisis occurs is going to be affected by and influenced by the actual relationships you have with people.
Just making sure that our interactions with people are consensual, understanding what it may feel like for someone to feel really scared and be sharing something with you. Not only what do they need, but what can I offer? And I think for me, actually, that's one of the first questions.
There's this opportunity in the crisis and in the breakdown for it to be a breakthrough. If you stick around, if you go through the hard times and get through the other side, there's a damn good chance you're going to come out with some wisdom that you never would have had. As a community of people who actually care about making change in the world, we need to lay the foundations for a more understanding relationship to crisis.
The best community support doesn't have to look like an intervention, and ideally when our communities are in a good place and when individuals have really good caring relationships and support networks set up, then the crisis doesn't happen, or it can be alleviated.
I think that what we really have to begin to take seriously is that emotions surface at a different range for different people. And I think sometimes there's a way that we think listening is enough, and it may be. Sometimes people might require something of us.
The authority that a psychiatrist is granted can be subverted to lift the voice of the participant in the therapeutic relationship. The role of the therapist, psychiatrist, social worker, mental health worker should be to step the fuck back and model a non-hierarchical, non-secretive way of being with one another.
I hope that all of the work that our communities are doing around healing from trauma, around transformative justice and community accountability, that these can coalesce into some peer support models and some models for intervening in crisis. And as much as I hope and I'm excited about this work, I'm also skeptical because of the magnitude of mental health crises.
There are so many different issues that face us. Sometimes it could be overwhelming, but if you keep moving forward and you keep addressing these issues and you keep trying to find those solutions, it brings hope to others.
From the epidemics of suicides and overdoses to the shock and rage sparked by the never-ending wave of police killings, it's painful to think about all those who died as a result of complications with mental health and their inability to receive the support that they needed. But their stories and lives aren't forgotten. Even as we continue to struggle within and against a world that is growing increasingly scary, we must take steps to collectively prepare ourselves for the battles to come. Finding new ways to manage mental unwellness, with all the beauty and conflict that entails, is a fundamental component of building stronger, healthier communities of resistance. If we're able to do this, our movements will not only become more sustained and resilient, but will gain new layers of possibility as we travel into the uncertain future together. So at this point, we'd like to remind you that Trouble is intended to be watched in groups and to be used as a resource to promote discussion and collective organizing. Are you interested in starting a local peer support group or just want to better integrate mental health awareness into your existing organizing projects? Consider getting together with some comrades, organizing a screening of this film, and discussing where to get started. Interested in running regular screenings of Trouble at your campus, info shop, community center, or even just at home with friends? Become a troublemaker. For $10 a month, we'll hook you up with an advanced copy of the show and a screening kit featuring additional resources and some questions you can use to get a discussion going. If you can't afford to support us financially, no worries. You can stream and/or download all our content for free off our website, sub.media/trouble. If you've got any suggestions for show topics or just want to get in touch, drop us a line at trouble@sub.media. A reminder that our online store is fully stocked with fresh swag for any Sub.media fans on your holiday shopping list. We're a broke collective funded entirely by donations, and all proceeds from these sales go towards making it possible for us to make more films like this one. We'll be doing our last shipment of the year on December 16th, so be sure and get your orders in before then at sub.media/gear. This episode would not have been possible without the generous support of John Hamilton. This is the last episode of the year, and after this, we'll be taking a month off. But stay tuned early next year for Trouble number 18, as we take a closer look at policing and community resistance to state violence.
So we see, within the context of the War on Terror, within the last 10, 12, 15 years, an attempt to fuse policing resources to better respond to what are perceived as domestic threats.
Fuck! It's the police! Now get out there and make some trouble.